Hi guys, this is Vineet and I welcome you to this video. Today's video topic is recovery in SQL Server. This is the continuation of the previous video. We were discussing recovery and restore operations in my previous video. If you haven't watched that video, please go ahead and do so. So this is the second continuation part. So here we will further discuss about the recovery overview in SQL Server. So let me take you to notes, and before I do that, I would highly request you to please go ahead and subscribe to my channel. There is a subscribe button coming below this video. Click on that subscribe button. It will give you a bell icon. Click on that bell icon, select all notifications to get notifications regarding all my future and upcoming videos. So let me take you to notes quickly. So today we will discuss upon the recovery and the transaction log. So transaction logs are basically transaction log files, and in these files all the transactions or SQL Server transactions get logged. And for most of the restore scenarios, it is necessary to apply a transaction log backup. So the transaction log backup application is only available under the full recovery model and the bulk log recovery model. So in most of the restore scenarios, it is necessary to apply the transaction log backup. And it basically allows the SQL Server database engine to run the recovery process for the database to be brought online. And recovery is basically the process used by SQL Server for each database to start in a transactionally consistent or in clean state. So for sometimes in order to bring the database online, we need to apply the transaction log backups, or we need to restore the transaction log backups. Now let's go to next paragraph. So if there is a failover or other non-clean shutdown, so these are two scenarios where failover has happened, or if there is a non-clean shutdown of SQL Server, the databases might be left in a state where some modifications were never written from the buffer cache to the data files. So there can be some scenarios where there is non-clean shutdown and there are failovers. In these two situations, your database may be left in a state where modifications were not written from the buffer cache or memory to the data files, and there might be some modifications from incomplete transactions in the data files. So there may be also possibility for any of the modifications from any of the incomplete transactions in the data files. When an instance of the SQL Server is started, it runs the recovery of each database. So whenever we start SQL Server, it basically performs the recovery of each database, and this recovery takes place in three phases, or consists of three phases based upon the last database checkpoint we have. Now let's discuss about the first phase, which is the analysis phase. And in this phase, basically the SQL Server analyzes the transaction log to determine what was the last checkpoint. So basically our transaction log files stores the checkpoint up till which the transactions are committed to the database. So during the first phase, when you start the instance of the SQL Server, so in the first phase, which is the analysis phase, SQL Server basically analyzes or reads the transaction log file to determine what was the last checkpoint marked in the transaction log, and it also creates a dirty page table and the active transaction table. So it creates two tables at that time, the dirty page table and the active transaction table. And it also checks for the checkpoint in the transaction log file. Now, if we talk about the dirty page table, it contains records of any pages that were dirty at the time database was shut down. So DPT basically, or dirty page table, contains any records of the pages that were dirty at the time the database was shut down. And the active transaction table basically contains the record of transactions that were active at the time database wasn't cleanly shut down. So this refers to the active transactions, and this refers to the dirty pages at the time database was shut down or database wasn't cleanly shut down. Now in the phase 2, so first phase was the analysis phase, where it checks the checkpoint in the transaction log file, it creates the dirty page table, and it also creates the active transaction table. Now phase 2 is the redo phase, And in the redo phase, basically what happens is this phase rolls forward every modifications recorded in the log. So after reading the transaction log file, basically roll forward every modification recorded in the transaction log file that might not have been written to the data files at the time database was shut down. So any of the modifications that are there in the transaction log files get written to the data files which have not already been written to the database or database files. Now there's a minimum log sequence number which is referred to by min LSN, which is minimum log sequence number, and this number is required for successful database wide recovery is found in the database table. So basically this number, which is the minimum log sequence number, we can found this in the database table, and this number is basically required for the successful database wide recovery, and it basically marks the start of the redo operations needed on all dirty pages. All right, so it checks the phase 2 checks the minimum log sequence number in the database table, and this log sequence number is basically required for any successful database wide recovery, and this number also marks the start of any redo operations that are needed on all the dirty pages that are recorded in the database table. At the phase this so at this phase now at this point, the SQL server basically, or the SQL Server database engine, writes to disk all dirty pages belonging to the committed transactions. So whatever transactions are committed, and if there are any dirty pages belonging to any of the committed transactions, SQL Server write those pages to the disk. Now then phase 3 commences after that. So phase 3 is the undo phase, and basically in undo phase there is a rollback of incomplete transactions that is found in the active transaction table to make sure the integrity of database is preserved. So in this particular phase, we roll back, or SQL Server rollbacks any incomplete transactions records for which are there in the active transactions table, and basically it does that rollback operation to make sure that integrity of the database is preserved. And after this rollback operation, the database goes online, and no more transaction log backups can be applied to the database. So after this point, we cannot apply any transaction log backups, and basically database comes to online state after this phase. Now information about the progress of each database recovery stage is logged in SQL Server error log. So each of the phase progress, or information about the progress of each database recovery stage is logged in the SQL Server error log. Alright, we can check SQL Server error log. So I can show you where the log is located, but I can't show you the database recovery information over there right now, because we are not performing database recovery at the moment. But yeah, I can surely show you where you can locate the SQL Server error log. So I've just invoked the SQL Server Management Studio, which will open up shortly, and after it opens up, we will connect to the default instance of the SQL Server. So waiting for it to load. It's loaded. Let me connect to the default instance of SQL Server. Basically, I'm trying to show you where the logs are located. So you need to expand first of all, you need to connect to the default instance of SQL Server. So this box comes up, you need to click on connect. You need to expand on databases. Maybe you cannot expand databases, or you should not expand databases. There's a management section over there. So if you expand that, under that there is a section for SQL Server logs. You can expand that, and you will see current over there, which is showing us the current log and not the archive logs. So you can expand this window, and this is the SQL Server event log. You can check that. So this is SQL Server error log, basically, not the event log. Here we are referring to SQL Server error log, not the event log. So that was the SQL Server error log. These are the error logs. Any error, you can check it out in the list of records loaded in this table. So it gives out all the information. You can check this log for any error messages. This log is time stamped. And let's go back to notes, and So we can track the recovery progress via the SQL Server error log. And the recovery progress can also be tracked using the extended event. We are not touching upon it here, but yeah, I will shortly cover that in my one of the practical videos where I will show you how you can use the extended events in SQL Server to check out any recovery progress in the SQL Server via the extended events. And there's a note here we are talking about the piecemeal restore scenarios. And basically in these type of restores, if a read-only file group has been read-only since before the file backup was created. So for these particular scenarios, if a read-only file group has been read-only since before the file backup was created, applying the log backups to this file group is unnecessary. So basically here we are talking that if you have a file group which is read-only basically, so in these scenarios there is no need to apply the log backups to these file groups. It is unnecessary totally, and it is skipped by the restore process, which is mentioned over here. Now there is a note. Second note is this: to maximize the availability of database in an enterprise environment after the SQL Server service is started, such as after a failover of an always-on failover cluster instance. We haven't discussed about it yet, but I will soon cover or prepare videos on this topic, the always-on availability groups. But here we are talking about the always-on failover cluster instances where your SQL Server works in a cluster mode, a combination of two or more servers, two servers basically. So basically, to maximize the availability of database in the enterprise environments where the SQL Server service is started, example is after a failover of always on failover cluster instance, or even if we do in place restart of SQL Server services. The SQL Server Enterprise, it's not condition but addition. So SQL Server Enterprise Edition can bring the database online after the redo phase. So this is only true for the Enterprise Edition. When your SQL Server service restarted, SQL Server tries to bring the database online just after this phase. And for other instances, it's phase 3. But for enterprise version of SQL Server, it tries to bring the database online just after the redo phase. It tries to bring the database online after the redo phase, while the undo phase is still executing. So that's one of the benefits of Enterprise Edition. Your database can become online just after the redo phase, and after that, your undo phase can still be executing at that time. But the database will be available to the users. And this is basically known as fast recovery. And fast recovery is not available when the database transitions to an online state. So once your database transitions to an online state, of fast recovery is not available, but the SQL Server service has not been restarted. Fast recovery is only available when you restart the SQL Server service, and the fast recovery is just not available because your databases are online. But you need to restart the SQL Server service in order to perform the fast recovery. And let's give an example regarding this. So executing alter database adventure works set online. If we execute this statement, it will not allow the database to be in the read-write state until all the three phases of recovery have completed, which can only occur once you restart the SQL Server service. Alright, these three phases can only occur when you restart the SQL Server service, and simply just passing on the statement to bring the database online will not make database work, or will not make the database in the read-write state. Now let me see whether I can cover these recovery models and supported restore operations in this video. I think we should cover this up or take this up in our next video. In next video, we will cover about the recovery models and the supported restore operations. And we will also talk about restore scenarios under the simple recovery model and under the bulk recovery model. And finally, we will talk about the database recovery advisor and accelerated database recovery as well. I will try to cover this complete notes in the next video for sure. And yeah, for now, let's wrap this up till here. And in next video, we'll start with the recovery model and the supported restore operations. So stay tuned, guys. If you have not yet subscribed, I would highly recommend you to please go ahead and subscribe right away. So there's a subscribe button coming below this video. Click on that subscribe button. It will give you a bell icon. Click on that bell icon. Select all notifications to get notifications regarding all my future and upcoming videos. So let me give you 5 seconds quickly. Please go ahead and subscribe. I'm waiting, guys. Please go ahead and do so right away so that you should not forget about this. Please subscribe. So guys, I hope you must have subscribed by now. Let me take you to the slide. Uh, Today we have discussed about the recovery in SQL Server, and basically if you want to send me an email, you can do so via email address. My email address is mentioned on the left hand side, which is vermavane@gmail.com. You can send an email to me, but your email should be pertaining to the items on the right hand side. So in case you need the copy of the notes that we have discussed today or discussed regarding this video, in case you need the copy of the notes, you can send me the request over the email, and I can send you the link to download the notes, but there's a nominal fee to be paid to download those notes. And if you want to schedule one-to-one calls with me, either a half an hour call and 1 hour call, you can do that. So for any discussions related to SQL Server, or if you're working in SQL Server field or looking for jobs in this field, you can schedule one-to-one calls. Or if you are studying SQL Server, you can definitely, or want to discuss any doubts, you can schedule one-to-one calls. And if you want SQL Server coaching altogether, do let me know via the email. I can prepare a plan for you, and we can converse over the email. And once you make the payment, we can start coaching on this. But this would be a group coaching, not one-to-one coaching. And if you need coaching on any particular SQL topic, which is one-to-one, do let me know about that via email. And apart from that, any analysis of transact SQL code, if you are creating any project, so where you are writing T-SQL code, and if you are experiencing issue with that code and you want me to analyze that particular code, do let me know about that. And if you want to collaborate with me regarding any content creation or for any brand promotions, you can do that. So send me an email regarding all this, and in general as well, you can send me an email. I will try to respond to it as per my convenience, uh, and I will try to reply on that as soon as possible, depending upon the content it contains. So yeah, that's it, guys. Thank you so much for your time on this video today, and you have a wonderful day ahead. Thank you.